Throughout September 2020, we hosted an online survey inviting local authorities to tell us about their journeys into digital identity. We wanted to know about the projects that local authorities were working on, what levels of expertise each council has internally, and what further resources they would require to source. Jessica Figueras from Hither Ventures presents some of the top line findings from the survey, closely followed by a short panel discussion around some of the results. With her will be John Graham, who is Project Manager, Corporate Portfolio Management Office at the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, and Donna Joyce from Ortho. A little bit of background information. Jessica is from Hither Ventures, is a tech strategist specializing in government policy and regulation and civil society. She currently advises startups and scale-ups on growth strategy, as well as carrying out tech futures research for the UK government. John Graham joined Tower Hamlets in 2009 after more than 20 years with Royal Mail. He manages a number of projects to improve business performance and customer service across many different council functions. And Donna Joyce is Corporate Account Executive for Ortho's public sector business, with over 20 years of experience as a sales leader and trusted advisor at companies like Dell and Symantec. She's always been passionate about building relationships, finding solutions to problems, coaching people to realize their true potential, and guiding people to transform their careers and their lives. Jessica, over to you.
Thanks so much, David. You forgot to mention ex-colleague as well. So nice to see you here. Great. Okay, so let's see if I can share my screen. So thanks so much for having me on. It's a really interesting piece of research to do. So we spoke to around 18 local authorities in England and Wales, very representative of all the different types of local authorities out there. And very simple piece of research, really, just to look at where people are with digital identity, what are some of the top barriers. But, you know, I think before we start, you know, I do want to, I suppose, call out a particular bias, which many of us, I think, in the tech industry do have kind of had in past years. You know, we've been talking about digital identity in public sector for a really long time now, you know, I mean, well over 10 years. It's been a preoccupation for a very, very long time. And I think we tend to have this very kind of idealized picture in our minds of the kind of experience that citizens should have, that you know, that will be inevitable. This very, very kind of joined up, seamless, universal experience. And, you know, I kind of like to suggest that, you know, this kind of idealized picture is very, very much based on the experience of places like Estonia here, which, as we can see, is an absolute earthly paradise of joined up citizen experiences. And you know, it's important to remember that that experience is powered by, you know, a single citizen ID covering the whole country. I think in an earlier session we heard from Andrew Budd as well, who talked about a similar setup in Singapore. There's a single government database. You know, so where you do have a single citizen ID covering the whole of the public sector, perhaps even the private sector, then yes, it's not going to be necessarily that hard to move to this, you know, very universal singular citizen experience of digital ID. Now, that's not the situation that we have in the UK. It's a deliberate policy choice of successive governments now that, you know, we haven't gone for a single citizen ID, and so we are in the realm of, you know, federated ID. That's where we are, and so in many ways it is kind of inevitable that we're going to have a tougher journey. So what did local authorities tell us? Just how Estonian are our local authorities? The simple answer is that we're really not very Estonian at all. The picture is very, very fragmented. There's a lot of difference between local authorities, and as we'll see, within local authorities, the picture itself is very fragmented. So what we see here is just over 10% have a single strategy for digital identity spanning the whole local authority. You know, there's a further 17% who are currently developing a strategy. So what do the rest have? 3/4 don't have a strategy, not aware that there is any strategy, or perhaps have separate strategies for different areas of the local authority, so different silos specific to different digital services. So, you know, fragmented picture within authorities as well as between them. So the provision for digital identity, authentication, verification, is very service specific, as we know that local authorities provide anything up to 500 plus citizen services. Of that, you know, a handful may be appropriate to be digitised. And what typically happens is that there is a different digital identity, different provision for authentication and verification for each one. And oftentimes, you know, we're talking about very, very rudimentary. So, you know, some of the people we spoke to said, you know, no services have a digital identity as such. You know, there are some customer accounts. The verification typically is often non-existent. You know, quite often it's done in the real world, if it's done at all. So, you know, there is an aspiration to a more Estonian experience of universal coverage with one citizen-facing digital identity provision across all of the services. But right now, you know, it's very siloed, and right now it's really focusing on council tax and housing revenues and benefits, because that is the mainstay of what local authorities provide. Those are the most important areas of what a council does in terms of transactional services, in terms of overall importance to the council. So, you know, fundamentally, most councils are, you know, focusing their efforts on these areas. And, you know, I think that one thing that came out really loud and clear from the service is that there's an expectation that this stuff should just be easier. You know, it's clear that there are so many technical barriers to getting this stuff working. So I did think that this last quote here was quite delightful. You know, this should be a product that we can buy and plug in our services to. So, you know, again, I think that really speaks to, doesn't it, this kind of idealization that many of us in the tech industry are perhaps guilty of, you know, over the last 10 years. You know, this idea that you know, the simple plug and play route to a beautifully Estonian experience, you know, should just be a kind of click away, and that's clearly not where we are. Yeah, I think this was perhaps kind of really brought it home. This shows what local authorities are planning to spend on digital identity solutions. I think what really stands out here is the high level of don't knows. So, you know, nearly half of, you know, senior IT people in councils just don't know what they're going to be spending on digital identity. I mean, fundamentally, that shows, doesn't it, that largely this stuff is wrapped up within other projects. It's wrapped up within service-specific projects. So it doesn't have that high level of visibility. Some of our respondents do have an idea, and, you know, some of them are planning to spend some quite significant amounts. So that is encouraging. So what's holding them back? So, I mean, primarily, the kind of big ones I want to point to here are lack of funding and kind of a business case, lack of business case, benefits not proven. I mean, those two things they're two sides of the same coin, aren't they? There's a sense of, for many councils, this just isn't a priority. Not that people don't think it's important. Everyone thinks it's important, but just there are so many other things which are so more pressing right now. And we look at what local councils have had to deal with COVID this year, you know, and that's on top of what they deal with every year, just the general backdrop of crushing lack of funding. So this is tough. And we can see that all of the other very practical barriers really come into play here, don't they? The lack of standards, the lack of government support, you know, issues with suppliers. You know, there's some really key factors here around digital exclusion, which is particularly faced by more mature councils, we can talk about in a bit. So lots of challenges. I think for many councils, it feels like pushing water uphill, to mix metaphors. So on the bright side, there were definitely, a small number of councils who responded, took part in our research, who are relatively mature here. And I think it's worthwhile looking at what maturity looks like for a local authority. These councils will typically have a single overarching digital strategy, specifically including identity. So, they may be some way from achieving it, but they've already thought about how they're going to go about the challenge of creating a single framework, a single citizen experience. They have a business plan, they have funding in place. It might not be enough, it might not be a fully costed 3-year plan, but it is in place. And they also have a plan to tackle the immediate practical barriers. One interesting thing we saw was that the less mature councils tended to mention pretty much all of the challenges and barriers you can think of. If you can think of a problem, they had it. What really made the more mature councils stand out in our research was the fact that they had much more specific challenges, just typically kind of 3 big ones. And the big stuff that came up specifically was around inflexible contracts with major suppliers. So here, I think we can probably imagine the issues, can't we? You've got the general stuff around big IT outsourcing contracts, which most local authorities are trying to unwind in some way, or trying to tackle, trying to break down. And you also have the fact that the major software suppliers to local authorities do have a big grip, don't they, specifically on those areas around specific services. And it's got to be difficult to create a citizen-centric view of the world when you have large, powerful suppliers tending to kind of insist that they own the citizen experience in particular service areas. Digital exclusion is a big deal for these councils too. And I think that really speaks to the fact that, forever local authorities have been the public bodies which are arguably closest to the need of the individual citizen. Local authorities are the bodies that look the individual citizen in the eye every day. They see us, they help us, they support us, they serve us in our hour of need, where we live, in so many critical areas of life. And so I think, I would also kind of offer as a word of advice actually to central government here, is that when looking at digital exclusion, speak to local authorities, because this is where the expertise is. Local authorities are much more cognizant of kind of complex needs around identity, and there really are some there. And it comes up when you're looking at areas like social care, for example, looking at how care actually works in practice, needing to delegate identity to a carer. And finally, this runs through the whole thing, unclear legislative framework, lack of government guidance and support. We've already heard a lot about this morning, so I'm hopeful that central government will do more on that front. So where next? I guess three points here. I think firstly, it's the major suppliers have work to do here for sure. And I know that there is so much innovation in the supplier community. There is so much skill and talent and technology there. I hope that we'll be able to kind of harness that expertise in a more positive way. Councils are crying out for more support from central government. This is not news, is it? We need more leadership on interoperability. I think local authorities have really largely been ignored actually by central government in recent years. We need better access to central government data sets for verification. Really positive to hear earlier that there's some movement on that. It's great to hear from Hannah at DCMS, movement on data sets there. And I think there needs to be more support on areas like complex service patterns. So, we've seen here those issues around digital exclusion, specific issues for example, homeless users without paperwork, which is a significant part of the population, vulnerable citizens. And somebody needs to do the work there to help to bring together kind of best practices to kind of curate and to facilitate. And lastly, and I say this as a kind of on a positive note, 'cause I'm sorry, I'm aware that I've been slightly gloomy so far. But there's a really encouragingly, councils are really positive about the idea of being identity providers themselves. I mean, 50% were interested, and only 11% were not interested. It's just quite a lot of don't know. So I think that's really positive, because particularly when you look at the practical issues that local councils face with, other priorities, funding, just a general level of pain when they're dealing with digital transformation, wanting to be proactive and actually provide a service to other players to provide access to their own attribute data sets for verification. I think it really speaks to that fundamental quality of local government, which is, I think there's a quality of real civic mindedness, in public service, which I think is great. So so to end on a positive note. So at this point, I would love to bring in John and Donna. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, both of you. Did you want to just kind of introduce yourselves briefly? John, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure thing. Morning, I'm John Graham from Tower Hamlets Council. Excuse the voice. I don't use it very much these days. I think that's my problem. I'm working on a variety of different projects, some tech, some process, some people. And my credentials for being here, I suppose, are that working with partners on a project to look at using local authority data sets to extend the reach of Verify to people who were excluded, who didn't have the passports, driving license, credit history, and so on. So we proved the concept. We're not quite sure where the whole thing will go from here, to be honest.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, let's talk a bit more about that in a second, shall we? Donna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Donna Joyce here from Auth0. So I work with customers across the UK around their identity and access management. So really happy to be here today and looking forward to having a discussion with you.
Fantastic, thank you both. So, so firstly, I wanted to ask: did the findings surprise either of you?
For me, not really. No, I think the question around finance is always going to be there, and what the priorities are. And in a COVID world, finances are absolutely shot to bits. So where this will pick up afterwards, I wouldn't like to say. I think there is a general move towards investment in IT, a higher dependence on it, and moving towards a customer relationship management systems, which allow a single identity or a single sign-in to be used, and they would support that. So I think the moves are in the right direction and supporting the use of a digital identity, but actually sort of getting it together and turning it on is going to be difficult. And as with government, the issue about having a single digital identity that works for every single council service is going to be a big challenge, because there is such a range and they are so different.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I wasn't surprised at all by the findings of the survey. I think as we as individuals are having more digital experiences all the time, we're also thinking about how we can take that into our working environment. And so all of the people working in those local authorities and councils are looking at the challenges they're facing on a day-to-day in their work environment and thinking, why can't it be as simple as it is for me in my personal environment, when I have that digital experience in a particular retail area or maybe in hospitality. So I think it definitely isn't a surprise, because as the digital identity moves forward, we're all expecting more from the services that we're consuming, and I don't think the public sector is any different in that respect.
So Donna, I know that you've worked with a lot of local authorities, but also in other sectors as well. I mean, is local government much different? What do you say?
No, not at all. Public sector in general, government organisations aren't alone. Like you said earlier, there's a tendency to think it's all doom and gloom, and you see, I think it was about 72% of the local authorities that don't have a digital identity strategy. but most companies that are immature in their identity strategy are experiencing the same challenges regardless of the industry. And so, like I said, it's not dissimilar to what's happening in retail, hospitality, which we can all connect to. Retailers, as an example, have got maybe several brands with different services, and they want to provide single sign-on across all of those brands. The number one priority here is enhancing the security without damaging any of the user experience. And I think it's the same in public sector. Lots of different digital services wanting to be able to provide a smooth user experience that's accessible to all, without compromising security, and ensuring that the user experience stays front of mind.
So John, I mean, as a relatively mature council with digital identity, I mean, what does it take to get to that single strategy across all of the different service areas?
I wouldn't necessarily say that we've got to that point, to be quite honest with you. There's a fair degree of persuasion. People need to understand what the benefits for the citizen and for each individual service will be of being able to use a single reusable identity across the piece. And I think it almost reveals good kind of the old adage about don't try and eat the whole elephant in one go. You know, if you look for somewhere which has got the opportunity, the means, and the benefits, make a strong case to using a digital identity, it might be a case of looking for that killer app or the big opportunity and going for that, and see what, if anything, can be built onto it, or whether it does need this kind of siloed, standalone set of identities. But the range there is enormous. Yeah. The types of citizen transaction that we deal with is very different. But there are things where there's routine transactions around benefits in particular that could benefit quite strongly from this.
Really interesting. Donna, what have you seen?
I think to your point, to the point that John made there, I think the number one thing is about looking at the bigger picture, but understanding that it's not one big thing to consume at one time. This can be done over time in varying rollouts and elements of a project. I think the number one thing that we're seeing with customers who are successful is they're the ones who are including the whole of the organization. Okay, digital identity isn't just an IT problem. It's not just something that the IT team needs to manage and deal with. It takes the whole business to find a solution. So ultimately, if you're looking to improve identity and digital identity across all of the services, you all need to sit in the same room. And actually, it goes back to what the gentleman said in the piece where we were talking about IAX at the very beginning, you know, about putting all of the government in one room and feeding them, you know, feeding and watering them under the door. If you've got all of the key stakeholders together, having a conversation around what the outcome is and what the benefits are, to John's point, for the citizens, then actually what you can then start to do is break that down and put a plan in place.
Sounds good. And I think that you also had some thoughts on what not to do, right?
Yeah,
let's hear it. What awful practices have you seen out there?
Well, so look, you don't have to do this on your own, right? You know, customers that we talk to on a daily basis have spent sometimes, you know, months, even years, thinking that this is something that they have to do themselves, because it's, you know, because they need to keep it within their secure environment. This is something that, when you get past the username and password of a login box, becomes really complex. And actually, we've seen customers who are 18 months into a project of trying to implement digital identity, and something as simple as single sign-on across their services still failing. And that has huge impacts on the rest of the organization as well. And so don't spend time sitting there thinking that you have to build this yourself. Understand that, you know, with integrating additional services, technologies are out there for you to support the journey that you're trying to go on. So working with third-party solutions who work with industry standards, have the ability to integrate with all of the solutions that you have within your infrastructure. The opportunity to then utilize a solution that will provide you those services from a digital identity perspective is out there. You're not on your own. Don't sit there and think you have to build it yourself.
Good stuff. So I'd like to move on to talk about interoperability. So I think we'll kind of agree that that is one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? A lot being said today about you know, lack of progress. I think we'd all like to see a lot more out of central government. So really great to hear Hannah speak earlier. So we heard about the identity and attributes exchange as well. I mean, John, what were your thoughts on that?
I think anything that leads us in that direction is obviously going to be very welcome. I think that the kind of risk of if everybody did their own thing, that they became a Tower Hamlets council identity for the citizen here. Can they use it if they move house? Can they use it to transact with anybody else and all that kind of thing knocked on? If somebody comes to us with a digital identity from somewhere else, at the moment we won't know what to do with it. You know, so kind of to what extent can we trust it? What's it based on? And if all of those things are known, then we'd be very open to an interoperable system, I think.
Mm-hmm. And kind of prospects for success, then it sounds like on the face of it, it could be useful.
Yeah, certainly. I think that in looking at certainly at Tower Hamlets, we're getting towards a single sign-on for a customer. If that sign-on is generated from an existing identity that they possess and that we're comfortable with, then that would be a move forward. That'd be a good thing, I think. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good stuff. And could you talk to us a bit more then about other kind of forms of, you know, what could central government do that would really, really help move things on?
The old question of money. I think in terms of just if there were set out a sort of clear set of standards and guidelines that cover the A to Z almost of developing and using digital identities in the public sector context. But you know, it'll go back to something fundamental, like what documents do you check, how do you check them, who do you check them, how often do you check them, in order to build up the trust in the identity that you're creating. Stuff like that would need doing. And also, we would need as local authorities to think very hard about what strength of identity and what degree of what specific attributes we need for someone to use their single digital identity in all of our different services and silos. You know, it's very different if you're sort of saying, please come and collect my old mattress, as it is, please come and take care of my grandma. You know, the kind of the information that's needed for those are really quite polar opposites.
Yeah, yeah. What are you seeing there?
Sorry, I was just going to say that's a great point, John, and that goes back to the conversation we had earlier, which was around introducing security and having risk-based security depending on what it is you're actually trying to achieve. And that's a really great point, and something that I hear a lot when we're listening to what we're being told by our customers.
Tell us more about that, Donna. Risk-based security. What kind of approaches are being taken?
So customers are really trying to understand. They realise that the digital identity is one of the most, you know, valuable tools within their business. But ultimately, being able to deliver a good user experience for the citizen is key. But at the same time, they need to ensure that they're providing, you know, additional layers of security. So how do you go about adding in those additional layers without impacting the user's journey? And it really becomes about understanding the user's behavior. And so where we're seeing our customers being successful is where they're implementing the solutions that allow them to understand the behavior of the citizens, and only challenge those additional security questions or additional security checks when it's a specific risk that they deem that the challenge needs to be made. So I'm a recycling queen, a bit like your mattress analogy, John. I'm a recycling queen. If I go onto my local government service to order a new recycling box, you know, they're going to send me a recycling box regardless of my digital identity. If I go in to pay a parking fine, or maybe to change an address, something that's more personal and something that's deemed more high risk, then actually at that point the service should challenge me to ensure I am who I say I am. And that's where customers are being successful, when they're dependent on the user's behavior, building in those additional layers of security.
Good stuff. And to pick up on that, then, I mean, what do we do with citizens who lack documentation, are digitally excluded in other ways? I mean, John, what's your thinking on this?
The provision is always going to have to be there for what should be hopefully sort of the diminishing number of people who are excluded in that way. But again, COVID has shown that the exclusion really can be quite extreme, you know, in terms of access to kit, access to broadband, and skills and language required to interact with anybody, whether it's a local authority or commercial body or whatever, through a digital channel. We have a variety of face-to-face options which people can use, not necessarily the most obvious ones, but places like libraries and children's centres will always offer face-to-face support. And there are partner organisations in the voluntary sector particularly who will assist those people where it's necessary. So I don't think that the digital exclusion thing needs to hold us back. We just need to keep that in mind, and making sure that they don't get permanently excluded from access, and that we build in what works best for those people who can use that channel. And there's sort of meeting the citizen expectation of transacting digitally with all the other bodies that they do. The council should not be any different.
There'll always be people who struggle for whatever reason with regards to the digital side of what we're talking about, but those digital services need to be considered for all individuals, irrespective of their situations. And so I think that's where it's really important that the identity industry and us as individual organisations, like today, that we're working together on solving those. So keeping the dialogue going and ensuring those conversations are continuing, so that we can come up and solve those problems together, because there's no one answer for all of it.
Perfect. Okay. And on that note, on a very positive note, thank you so much, John and Donna, and I'm going to hand back to David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and also John and Donna too. Jessica has engagingly put over as when we used to work together at Global Data. Thank you very much.